Diary of an Eco-Warrior, Chapter 3, Tracking a Tracker. I don't want to crow, but I'm actually very good at tracking people down, especially the ones that don't want to be found. It's part of being a good investigative journalist. But tracking a tracker would prove challenging. If Collins wanted to drop off the radar, then he'd be tough to find. Still, my approach would be similar. People can hide, but rarely change. Often they have idiosyncrasies such as obsessive-compulsive hand-washing, addiction to gambling, sport, or porn, preference for a particular type of cigar. Ask around and you'll find a recent run on hand sanitizers or special photo editions of readers' wives. Habits are hard to repress. The trick is to get to know your subject really, really well. Try to second-guess them by putting yourself in their shoes. Collins would probably conceal himself as a tracker would. Perhaps he'd mimic an animal he admires. Lucy took me back to her apartment to help me learn my subject. She had been Collins's producer over the years and had all of his videos. I suspect that she believed she'd discovered him, a diamond in the rough, before the crocodile incident. For all I know, she might have been the one to leak it. "Sorry about the mess," she said. "I'm not around often enough to get a cleaner." I wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. It looked like a showroom apartment, practically immaculate. She had a cat. It sidled up to me and rubbed its back against my leg in a friendly manner. Made me miss mine even more. I reached down to give him a proper scratching, but she whisked him away. "Careful," she said. "My cat's bipolar." She set him down before a bowl and took out a blister pack of pills. Best steer clear until he's had his medication. His name was Nemesis. I began my research with a box of clippings that she gave me. Collins had a troubled childhood. He grew up in Zimbabwe, but was of British origin. His parents had some financial troubles, possibly political ones as well, and left under the cover of darkness. Unfortunately, they forgot to tell their son, who was out collecting beetles. Apparently his zoological interest blossomed early. They also forgot to come back for him, or tell him where they'd gone. He returned to an empty house, which was promptly repossessed by the government in exchange for an orphanage, where he spent the next couple of years. When he was asked about this in an interview, he said that they probably had a lot on their mind at the time. A strange form of denial. Surely it would be hard to forget that you had a son? As far as I am aware, they never found each other ever again. He was eventually adopted by a park ranger who needed help chasing poachers. He found an eager assistant in the young boy who enjoyed taking pot shots at them with his sniper rifle. The ranger had also adopted another surrogate son, a South African by the name of De Koning, who was roughly the same age as Collins. I assembled snippets from various interviews in which Collins spoke of his time as idyllic, but there was also an undercurrent of regret. He left his adoptive father as a teenager and hasn't been back since, so this raises some questions. I got the impression that he was hiding something. Collins worked as a tracker in Africa, Australia, and New Zealand throughout the ensuing years. He was very good at it too, but often got in arguments with clients. It wasn't unusual for someone with his skills to guide amateur hunters, but the work was distasteful to him. According to one police transcript, he actually gagged and trussed up a client as a pig and put them into one of their own wild boar hunts. Luckily, their fellow hunters realized their misjudgment just before the kill. It was a close call, and Collins was stripped of his credentials. He dealt with it in his usual way, by going somewhere else and reinventing himself. He was amazingly resilient. Perhaps that was on account of his previous misfortune. He did a stint for the BBC as a wildlife consultant, and this is where I figure he got the bug to get in front of the camera. But this was short-lived, as I gather his reporting style was somewhat inflammatory and politically incorrect. Plus, there were comments about him endangering the crew on account of being more interested in helping animals than people. Not long after, he reinvented himself again as a naturalist and hosted an amateur program on a local cable channel in America. This was eventually parlayed into a television series that very few people saw, but nonetheless kept going. The series ran for several years as Collins scoured the globe for animals and plants in peril. Even though Lucy only showed me her hand-picked highlights, I must have watched about 6 hours of Collins in action. It was not hard to like the guy. In his early years, he came across as a babe lost in the woods, excited by everything around him. There was something infectious and endearing, yet hapless about him. He seemed genuinely shocked when the animals refused to cooperate. After all, he was there to help them. He had a tremendous knack for getting in the soup. Each episode brought new confrontations and successive injuries. In one episode, he upset a beehive, which came to a sticky and painful end. He was charged by a buffalo, accosted by a koala, pecked by an upset emu, decked by a panda, face-slapped by a Portuguese man-of-war, swarmed by red ants, charged by an angry beaver, crushed by a cow, and heckled by dolphins, and hit by an angry moose. and that was just the first season. But the guy definitely had charisma. When he spoke to camera, it felt as if he was speaking directly to you, rallying you against the cause. But as he matured, a hardness set in. He became more scarred, literally and figuratively. The hazards of the job were taking their toll. In the end, there was an undercurrent of bitterness, as if he had something to prove all the time. I felt as if he was constantly seeking approval, but became disillusioned by the silence at the other end. Despite skyrocketing to glory, he seemed frustrated by the public. He wanted them to care as deeply as he did about what really mattered to him, but ultimately it was a one-way conversation. Television was too small for Collins, but Animal Land gave him a new lease on life. It was meant to be his capping glory. He had a renewed sense of purpose and an urgency about him as he set to evangelizing his greatest achievement. No expenses were spared. It was to be the greatest show on earth. And like many of his previous assignments, he took to it with a zeal and earnestness that was commendable in its ardor, if not somewhat out of place with the surroundings. I mean, let's face it, Animal Land was a tourist trap. You could sense the investors salivating at the merchandising opportunities. But Collins, to his credit, seemed utterly oblivious to the crass commercialism of it all. In his mind, he was creating a utopia for both man and beast. Children came in droves, delighted by the bears, the antelope fields, and the rhinoceros park. But their squeals of delight could not mask the ill-fated premise. Wild animals are wild. Even more so when not behind bars. It was a teddy bear picnic just waiting to happen. It was a tragedy from the start. As I watched the last episode of his television program, I couldn't help but feel a certain sadness. Collins didn't deserve what happened to him. I realize that now. Obviously, he felt the same way. Otherwise, he wouldn't have disappeared from the limelight and abandoned the cause he held so dearly, no matter what the trials had been. But the disaster at Animal Land had been so catastrophic that nobody could have expected otherwise. I was sad because I realized now that he was probably in some far-flung corner of the world licking his wounds, punishing himself for what he perceived to be his most momentous failure. And now Lucy raised the possibility that he wasn't to blame. Was this wishful thinking, or had higher powers had it in for Collins from the start? I knew it was like to be the underdog, the guy who kept bashing his face against the wall, hoping that somebody would notice. He touched a nerve. At least I knew who it was I was searching for, someone who wallows in pain by flagellating themselves. We had something in common there. Lucy had gone out to run an errand and hadn't returned. Must have been over an hour ago. Should I be concerned? More important, I needed to find a toilet. I must have had 5 cups of coffee by then, and my bladder was like a watermelon. I went to the hallway and saw 2 doors. I figured that the bathroom was the first one I came to, but I saw that the one at the end of the hall was open. Probably her bedroom. I couldn't resist. It's not that I was perving, I was just curious. I slipped inside. Her room was tidy, but her bed was unmade. It faced a small writing desk. All the items on it were neatly arranged. Writing paper, pens, paper clips, envelopes, and a pack of Turkish cigarettes. I sniffed the packet. Very heady, very exotic. There were only a couple missing. No ashtray either. Not the sign of a compulsive smoker, but one who partakes occasionally, a guilty indulgence. My eye caught some movement. The door was opening slowly. I froze. Crap! This wouldn't look good. I was trying to fashion a good excuse when I realized it was the cat. He stopped and stared at me with his unblinking eyes. Thank God for that. Still, his saucer gaze was unnerving. Hey there, Nemesis. How you doing, buddy? I stepped forward and he started hissing. His back hairs went up like a shot and he arched something frightful. I tried to speak to him in soothing tones. What happened next was kind of a blur, but I realized he'd launched himself at my face. I couldn't see a damn thing, but I could feel his sharp claws digging into my neck, and then he bit me. I may have overreacted, but I was in a panic. I grabbed his face and pushed hard. He flew across the room and ricocheted off the lamp. I hot-footed it out of there, but he was back on his feet before I made it to the hallway. He launched himself at me again from behind, and now he was on my back. He was harder to reach. I had to body check him against the wall. That made him squeal. Not a pleasant sound, but he wouldn't let go. God damn it, Kitty, get off of me! I dropped to the ground and did a fireman's roll. Every time my body weight bore down on him, he made a horrible squelching sound, but he wouldn't stop screeching and scratching. I saw my blood on the carpet, and I realized I had to take things up a notch. I ran into the bathroom and jumped in the shower. I blasted Kitty. He didn't like it one bit. He tried to run away, but I held him there as punishment. Not very mature, I know, but I was running on adrenaline. That'll teach you to mess with me. When I thought he'd had enough, I pitched him onto the bath mat. He stood there looking at me like a drowned rat. I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes, but we had come to an understanding. For now. He skulked away. But then I caught my reflection in the mirror. Christ, my face, a cheese grater facial. There was nothing to swab myself with but beautiful cream towels or toilet paper. I chose the latter. I didn't believe in fate much, or bad luck for that matter, but I hadn't had a lucky break for months. And then Lucy came along, and I thought it was a sign of something more positive, but now I wasn't so sure. If I had trouble fighting off a house cat, how was I going to survive her expedition with Chuck Collins? Lucy showed up a short while later. She didn't take notice that her cat was wet, only that it had eaten carefully around its medication. She saw my face and put two and two together.